Today's episode is brought to you by the DAX Copilot from Microsoft. DAX Copilot is your AI assistant for automating clinical documentation and workflows, helping you be more efficient and reduce the administrative burden that causes us all to feel overwhelmed. To learn more about how DAX Copilot can help you reduce burnout and restore the joy of practicing medicine, stick around after the episode or visit aka.ms/knock-knock-high. That's aka.ms/knock-knock-high. Knock, knock, hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Knock, Knock, I, with me, your host, Dr. Glockenflecken. Thank you all for joining me this fine evening or wherever it is you are. It's been about a week since I've got to sit down and record some eyeball stuff for you guys. I've got a few things to touch on. All right, it's been an eventful week. Here's what I'm going to start with. So, you know, I love when eyeballs get in the news. It's just there's not much that really brings like unbridled joy into my social media life. There's a lot of doom and gloom on social media. There's a lot of this sucks. There's a lot of, oh my God, what are we doing in society? There's a lot of sometimes arguments with people. Occasionally I laugh at things, but whenever something happens with an eyeball, oh man, it's Christmas morning. It really is. It's fantastic. I'm sure we all have that one weird thing that we are obsessed with, or that you are obsessed with. We all know what I'm obsessed with. That when it makes pop culture or it makes mainstream news, you're like, yes, finally, someone's talking about the foot. I don't know, whatever it is, a pancreas, potentially a stamp collection. I don't know, whatever it is. You guys have very diverse and different hobbies, I'm sure. I'd love to hear what your weird thing is that you get excited about when it pops up on social media. But anyway, there was a thing that happened on X. Yes, that's right. I know. Just like 2 weeks ago, I told you I deleted Twitter. Well, guess what? I'm back. I told you I'd be back. It's never for long. I can't stay away. I've got this problem, you see, where I'm addicted to social media. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you why I always come back. I always come back to because I find things like this, like what I'm about to tell you, and I'm taking like painfully long to get to the point. Twitter, X is like just the place that it's easiest for me to see it and make a quick comment about something. I don't have to try to make a video, do all the production, editing, all that stuff. I can just real quick share my thoughts with some. I know you can probably do it with other things too, but I have a large audience on Twitter. It's easy. I'm comfortable there with the platform. And it's the place where I can just very easily see these things that come up. All right, so here it is. Here's the thing. So I'm sorry. I know I said I'd be away for a while, but I'm back and more miserable than ever, folks. Okay, so this was a tweet by someone in the Baltimore community. This is about, there's a Baltimore Ravens linebacker, Kyle Van Noy, who fell. There's a lot of falling in football, was tackled. And it was, I think the defender kind of landed on his back and kind of pushed his head into the ground. Somehow through that force, he suffered an orbital fracture. And then afterwards, he was talking about his experience. This happened while they were playing the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. So he did some interviews talking about his experience getting the orbital fracture, but more importantly, the response from the training staff that was at the game implicating the Chiefs training staff, which I guess they don't have their own training staff. They probably do, but maybe I guess the doctors that are on call for a game are all going to be local, right? That makes sense. All right, so here's what he said. This is Kyle Van Noy, starting linebacker for the Ravens. Quote, "They took an entire quarter to get down to talk to me in the locker room. They, meaning an eye doctor. That's what he's. I've pieced that together from a couple different clips. They being like they said, there's an eye doctor who's going to be there and take a look at you. So ophthalmologist. An ophthalmologist took an entire quarter to get down to talk to me in the locker room, which to me is unacceptable. As a player, people have to expect you to be professional, handling business, and then a time of need. I wanted that from them, and I felt like I didn't get it. Okay. First of all, his reaction is very valid, right? You have an injury, you want to be evaluated immediately. I am sure professional football players are used to getting immediate evaluation. You sprain a knee, you break your leg, you get a concussion, you get hit, you're immediately evaluated. You have the doctors, you have an orthopedic surgeon, you have a sports medicine or a neurologist that are now at the games because they're really into diagnosing and figuring out concussions in football now. And maybe not as much as they should be, but they're making an effort, right? So there are neurologists at the games, independent neurologists, what they always say. Obviously, there's sports medicine, orthopedic surgeons that are also at the games. I have met them that go to games in different sports, and it sounds honestly like a really pretty fun gig. What they don't typically have are ophthalmologists, everyone. And so I could not help. Now, I'm validating his experience because sure, yes, when you're used to that kind of immediate response around you, then the idea that you have to wait up to 30 to 45 minutes for an ophthalmologist to show up to your NFL locker room, that can seem egregious. But as someone who is an ophthalmologist and understands ophthalmology time, I could not help but erupt into raucous laughter when I heard his complaint. Nothing on him, all right? It's how he is experiencing healthcare in that very weird setting, all right, of being a professional football player in a locker room having an eye injury. But Mr. Van Noy, as if you're going to hear this, I thought it was extremely impressive that you got an ophthalmologist within 30 minutes to come to your NFL locker room at a stadium. That is that's incredible. Like, you know how hard it is? There are thousands of doctors out there who have been trying for years to get ophthalmologists to come to their place of work at a hospital. I'm sorry, it's incredible response time for an ophthalmologist. 30 minutes. Like, I was putting myself in that position. Like, okay, it's like someone had to be on call, right? And so let's say I was just like the community on-call ophthalmologist. Because I highly doubt that they have a different doctor for every part of the body that's on call for these football games. I don't know any ophthalmologist that works the games. Maybe that exists. If I'm wrong, please tell me. Send me a message or an email. But I'm not aware of that. And so I'm putting myself in the position of a community ophthalmologist, which I am, who takes call, which I do, at various hospitals, which I do. And then I get a call. There's an NFL linebacker who has an eye injury. Can you come in? If I get yeah, okay, that's interesting. That's strange. But yes, I will come in. But at that moment, I am in my pajamas, right? I'm probably in bed at that point. It's nighttime. All right. I am not ready to come into the hospital. And then I got to probably fight traffic to get there. So honestly, 30 minutes, that means that ophthalmologist is probably like, yeah, let's go. I'm on my way. Mr. Van Noy, Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to check you out. And that ophthalmologist, I can't imagine, must have felt so good about himself. Like, it's been so long since I've responded this quickly to a call. Man, people are going to be so impressed by me. And then to hear that, and he probably got chewed out by somebody, either on the Ravens or at work or something. So anyway, shout out to that ophthalmologist because they were not, I'm sure, ready to receive that call and got there in a very timely manner. real quick, let's talk about the injury he had. That's another issue. Like, okay, should there be a sideline ophthalmologist? By the way, I volunteer. I'd love to be there. Give me the job. I will sit there and watch as many NFL games from the sidelines as you want me to, waiting for someone to lose a contact lens. Or at worst, get a corneal abrasion, or in this case, an orbital fracture. That's pretty uncommon. So I mentioned at the beginning the mechanism of like getting his head pushed into the turf, kind of into the front of his helmet. It must have been so hard that maybe like the face mask kind of like hit him right in the eye. Because we've talked about orbital fractures before. It typically takes a pretty good blunt trauma to push on the eye or on the bone to increase the pressure to blow out the orbit. Most likely, his orbital fracture was the orbital floor. That's the most common place. I don't know for sure, obviously, but a fracture itself is not necessarily an emergency. It can be, though, in a couple situations. First of all, anytime someone has an orbital fracture, if I get that phone call, I'm talking to the emergency physician and I'm asking questions to try to rule out two things: an open globe injury and an extraocular muscle entrapment, both of which are pants patients. All right. The open globe injury, that's a clinical diagnosis. Anybody who's trained in emergency medicine, should be able to diagnose that. You can look at the eye. You can see if there's any extruding, any scleral lacerations, extruding uvea, which is basically like the iris type tissue coming out of the eye, peaked pupil, very poor vision. All right. So pretty nasty trauma. Unlikely that was the case, obviously, because there is a physician there who can at least look at the eye and tell if something structurally looks like an eye or not. The other thing, and so I can figure that out over the phone. And I always ask those questions with any trauma that I get called about. I ask questions trying to get at, okay, could there be an open globe? Usually there's imaging associated with it. Now, probably not here. The other thing is that extraocular muscle entrapment. So with any trauma, I'm always asking, how are the eye movements? Can the patient move their eye in all different directions? Because if there's a restriction, like most likely it's looking up and one eye doesn't move up, and they're a young guy like Kyle Van Noy, my suspicion for extraocular muscle entrapment goes sky high, and I am busting my ass to get into that hospital or that NFL locker room. So I'm asking questions about motility. Now, was somebody there who's willing to look at the eye and try to do those types of assessments? Hopefully, I don't know. If it was just an orthopedic surgeon, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I make videos featuring an orthopedic surgeon where they have this blank look on their face whenever someone talks about non-bone related things. That's kind of what I imagine when probably ortho showed up to look at Kyle Van Noy, figure out what the problem was on the field, and he said he hurt his eye. It was like deer in the headlights type of thing. I don't know for sure. I don't want to sell my orthopedic surgeon colleague short, but there's no bones in the eye. So anyway, it's like once in a blue moon that you're going to have. I mean, you get more of it in basketball, I feel like, because his fingers, because you have a face mask, right? That's protecting the eye. So you're not going to get as many eye injuries during a football game. I can't even think of another one. Basketball, yeah, all the time. There probably are ophthalmologists that roam the sidelines or in the back at bad NBA games because eye injuries can be relatively. I've seen people lose contacts. I joke, but that's probably one of the biggest emergencies. Emergencies in quotes. Corneal abrasions, subconjunctival hemorrhages, kind of minor traumas. But anyway, that was the interesting thing that happened recently with eyes in the news. All right, let's take a break. I'll be right back here. I'm not proud of being back on Twitter, you guys. I don't know. I've been back for I took I want to say like 10 days off from posting anything on Twitter. My people, my people that help me with social media, they posted a few things, but I physically wasn't on social media for about 10 days. That was enough. I was ready to come back. But like it was within a day, I like already got into like an argument with somebody. It's just sometimes I swear, it's just a big waste. I don't know. This one was about, there was I think it was senator. I'm trying to remember. Someone in Congress who tweeted something about a hospital that was private equity owned and all the terrible things that were happening, like nurses not able to get Medicaid, having to buy their own supplies like syringes, and just terrible care happening. It was a quick tweet. And then I quoted that and said something about maybe we should let physicians own hospitals, which is something I've been on against. I've made videos about this. Like if you're an avid Glockenflecken fan, you've heard me talk about physician-owned hospitals. We need, because these private equity corporations, companies, they're buying up a bunch of practices and they're either selling them off to like United Healthcare, or they're just cutting costs and then selling to other private equity companies, or they're merging them into big hospital corporations, big like hospital conglomerates. They're consolidating healthcare basically. That's what this corporatization of healthcare is doing. It's consolidating healthcare. So unless we're going to just turn the whole shebang over to the government, which is not ever going to happen, like we have to introduce some kind of competition. And if you're going to let United Healthcare own hospitals, if you're going to let private equity own hospitals, like why don't you let physicians own hospitals? Like what's the reason? And this is all part of the Affordable Care Act that introduced this ban on physician-owned hospitals. And so anyway, I made this comment, and of course, it never ceases to amaze me that if you criticize anything in our healthcare system, there's going to be some people who are willing to defend it to the death. And that goes for like insurance companies too. Believe it or not, you would think that United Healthcare, with an approval rating of roughly 0%, that it won't have any defenders. But no, you will always find people that are willing to defend the worst things in this country. And of course, there are people that came back at me and was like, physician ownership is a terrible idea. As opposed to what? What we have now? And by the way, there have been reviews, there have been studies that have looked at outcomes of physician-owned hospitals versus non-physician-owned hospitals. And the care is better. Certain outcomes are better at a lower cost. And also, by the way, consolidation of hospitals results in worse staff morale. There's a whole bunch of problems with that. So for a lot of reasons, there's no need for a ban on physician ownership of hospitals. And people just can't even fathom the idea that, physician, what a conflict of interest that would be. Well, how is it not a conflict of interest to have a corporation own a hospital for the sole purpose of making money off of that hospital, off of the health of people? I don't know. You can find conflicts of interest in anything, in any business whatsoever. And so to use that as a reason. Anyway, I'm getting on a soapbox here. That's not the point of this, all right? The point is that I got very quickly into arguments, which is exactly what got me off of Twitter in the first place. But I'm back. I'm back, everyone. All right, let's do a couple eyeball topics, shall we? All right, let's get to something more joyful, more fun to discuss. All right, so the first thing is actually earlier this evening, I had Kristen and I did a Patreon live. So by the way, if you're not a member of our Patreon, we would love for you to be part of our group. We do these Patreon hangouts, so anybody can come in and we just chat with them for an hour. We get to know each other. We get to talk. You get to ask questions. We can, whatever it is you want to talk about, we're willing to talk. And so we had a great chat with a handful of people. And it's fun to have like an intimate little environment there. But anyway, one of our wonderful Patreon members had his kid with him, and she had a very important question for me. And so she said her question was, if you cough, can your eyes pop out of your head? I can't think of a better question to answer on Knock Knock Eye right here. All right. So I gave her the answer. And so let's talk about, can your eyes pop out of your head? The quick answer, yes, they can, but not in the way that you think. So people think when your eye pops out, it just dangles on your cheek. All right. That is not what typically happens. There is some redundancy to your optic nerve, though. So if you remember your anatomy, oh, look, I don't have an orbit anatomy, but on YouTube, all right, you can see. So the eye is encased. Imagine there's like bones around the eyeball. The optic nerve comes off the back of the eye, and it kind of like, it's kind of curly, and it just, there's some redundancy to it is the point. Throughout the orbit, which is the back of kind of when you get past behind the orbit, that's your brain. You're into your brain at that point. So the eye sits in the orbit. Well, all that orbital space holds a lot of things, but one of the things it holds is all of the length of the optic nerve. But there's some redundancy there. So the eye can move forward, all right, and it has some ability to do that. And that's really important when you're talking about things like retrobulbar hemorrhages, or there's blood that's accumulating behind the eye in the case of a trauma. You want the eye to be able to move forward a little bit, because if it couldn't, then the eye would just get squeezed tighter and tighter, and you'd go blind from glaucoma. But there's some redundancy to it. So the eye can move forward, but it can't move forward enough. There's not enough extra optic nerve for it to just be like dangling down here on your cheek. All right, you'd have to have some major, major trauma where like the optic nerve is just disconnected. It's like transected optic nerve. So there is some redundancy, but it doesn't dangle down here. Now, but that doesn't answer the question, can it pop out of your head? So there's no popping sound. It's not like, let me do that better. Yeah, something like that. Kristen can do that really well. She's got like the pop thing. She can do that. But no, it doesn't make a sound. The one situation that I've seen this in is there are certain conditions. One would be like severe thyroid eye disease, where the eyes are just more forwardly placed. And so someone with like maybe a shallow orbit, there are certain conditions where some facial, dystrophies or configurations where the orbits are really shallow, so the eyes are very forward placed. In thyroid eye disease, the extraocular muscles get thick and fat, and that actually can push the eye forward a little bit. Well, if it's really severe, what can happen, and this can happen spontaneous actually, or with just minimal trauma, or even just rubbing the eye, you can do this. The eye will actually move forward enough to where the eyelids get trapped behind the eyeball. All right, so the eye just kind of like sits right here. I'm holding the model up to my face, and the eyelids are coming behind the eye like this. So the eye's just hanging out, flapping in the breeze. Not flapping, it's sitting in the breeze. And that's a big deal because the eye will dry. It's a mucous membrane. The eye, it'll dry out very quickly, and then you'll have breakdown, melting of the cornea. It'll just die. Bad things happen, or you'll lose all your vision. You'll go blind. And so it's actually a PANTS patient, a very, very rare PANTS patient, when a patient will have what's called a subluxation, a globe, because eyeball is not sophisticated enough for us ophthalmologists, a globe subluxation, where the eyelids get trapped behind the eyeball. And it's actually fairly straightforward to fix that. You just kind of get your finger underneath there, and you just pull it out, pull the eyelids out, the eye will go back in. Sometimes if it becomes a recurring problem, and I've seen patients that, no, that's multiple patients, this is like one patient I can remember, that this was a recurrent problem, and what we actually had to do was suture part of the eyelids closed to prevent that from happening. Sometimes you have to do, like in thyroid eye disease, you have to do oh man, I'm blanking on the term, a orbital decompression. That's what I'm thinking of, where you break the walls of the orbit to allow the eye to sink back into the back of the orbit. So anyway, yes, your eyes can pop out of your head. It's slightly different. It's an emergency, but it doesn't happen. You have to have some other issue going on with your eyes, or you have a certain condition that will predispose you to having this type of thing happen. It's got to be pretty severe, what we call proptosis, where the eyes are just very forward, very anterior. All right. So I don't want people out there just being very concerned that this is going to happen to you, because it's not a common thing. I can think of 2 patients in the 7 years, really, if you're adding residency as well, 2 patients in 11 years of doing ophthalmology stuff that I have seen this happen to. And it's not going to happen when you're coughing or sneezing. Didn't you always hear that as a kid? It's like, if you sneeze with your eyes open, it's like impossible to do. Your eyes will pop out of your head. I was worried about that as a kid. I even tried to do it a couple times and just can't do it. It's really hard to do. So I guess I don't think anybody's ever done it successfully. So I guess it's possible. Anyway, all right, let's take one more break and we'll come back. I've got one more eye thing to talk about. Okay, so I've had a few people over on YouTube, by the way. You can give me your questions over on the YouTube. I always check all the YouTube comments. I keep telling you guys. Go to our YouTube channel at Glaucomfleckens. You can watch the Knock Knock Eye episodes there, or you can listen to it like you would a normal podcast, but then go there and leave some questions for me. All right. I love reading those comments. You guys have been really liking the YouTube thumbnails. So have I. A wonderful producer has been helping us with that. And so we're, I love reading those. Great. I get great comments from you guys. I've gotten, over the past few weeks, a few people have asked about different inherited diseases of the eye. I've touched on a couple of them. We talked about aniridia, that can be inherited, and ocular albinism. That's a part of that. So I thought every so often, because could be a really complicated topic. In fact, there's like you could do like a fellowship in ophthalmic genetics. There's a few places around the country that have that. It's very involved. But I figured I would, every so often, I'll pick a dystrophy. I'll pick something, inherited retinal disease or inherited cornea disease or optic nerve disease or whatever it is, and we'll just chat about it. So I'm going to choose one that I think is probably one of the most interesting ones for reasons why that I'll get to here in a second. This is called Leber congenital amaurosis. Amaurosis with an M. Leber congenital amaurosis. So this is actually a family of congenital retinal dystrophies. So this affects the retina. There are a lot of different genes, a lot of different mutations that can lead to this disease. So it's not like one mutation leads to this disease. It's a disease that can be caused by a variety of different genetic abnormalities. Patients with this disease will get severe vision loss at a very early age. Usually patients, babies when they're born or very early on, they'll have nystagmus. So when the eye is not seeing anything, it's not registering anything, or have very poor vision, the eyes will kind of move back and forth like this. They'll shake. That's called nystagmus. And that's a sign of poor vision. That's a sign that there's something wrong. The pupils might be poorly reactive. They might be sluggish. They might not have any reaction whatsoever. A lot of times in these infants, you can't really check visual acuity. So if you have a suspicion that there's some visual problem, then you can get a what's called an ERG, an electroretinogram. It's basically like an EKG, but for eyes. There's an electrode, just like you would an EKG. It just goes right in front, or kind of just barely touching the front of the eye, and through magic, it creates a wave that that measures the electrical impulse in the retina. Incredible stuff. How do people discover these things? That's what I want to know. It's like, how does someone really like figure this out? And this whole science to it. That has the idea of an ERG has always just blown my mind. And I don't know what the things that you can take away from that. And pediatric ophthalmologists are incredible because they can just look at these things just like a neurologist would look at an EEG, or a cardiologist could look at an EKG, and they can just like right there. It takes like 2 seconds. Oh yeah, this is whatever. This is early repolarization of a hyperpolarized cone. Oh look, here's a rod that's not working right. This is a cone that thinks it's a rod. I don't know, all of the different things. So anyway, this is Leber congenital amaurosis. It is probably the most severe retinal dystrophy that can cause blindness, like before the age of 1. So it's a really severe disease, a hugely enormously difficult disease for the families. At Iowa, there's a huge, very well known, very famous inherited retinal disease clinic run by Dr. Ed Stone, and we got to, I felt very fortunate as a resident because we got to see some of these diseases like LCA, Leber congenital amaurosis, that some people go their whole career without ever seeing these diseases. And so people come from all over the world to see Dr. Stone because he's involved in stem cell research and trying to work on trying to help these patients and help them see again. So as I mentioned, it's usually you have to have it's an autosomal recessive disease, LCA. It's a very low prevalence, so about 2 to 3 per 100,000 births. So it's fairly rare. And as I mentioned, there's usually signs of decreased vision at a very early age. It's a clinical diagnosis though. Like you can, based on the pattern and the family history and the age of the patient, you can make an educated guess that this is an LCA. And then that diagnosis, it can be supported by doing, like I mentioned, ERG, the magic. And there are other things like an OCT, which takes pictures of your retina and can see atrophy of the photoreceptor layer. The underlying mechanism for this disease is a problem with visual phototransduction. Now, I'm not going to go through the details of what visual phototransduction is, but it's basically Krebs cycle for ophthalmologists. And it makes us just as mad. Maybe not the people who are really getting into this, like Dr. Stone, probably loves vision phototransduction. The rest of us, honestly, I could not care less about the proteins that activate rods and cones and all the chemical things that occur therein. They're important. I'm glad people know about them and are doing things to like help harness that energy into something productive, but that's not me. It's hard. I still, like, even if I tried to remember a lot of it now, I probably couldn't. I'd have to go look at a diagram. So thank goodness for people that understand this stuff. But anyway, it's a problem in that pathway. It's a problem in the Krebs cycle for ophthalmologists. and essentially, oftentimes there's not much in the way of clinical findings on exam. Over time, patients can develop what are called these bone spicule-like pigmentation in the retina. But in general, their eyes look functionally quite normal, unless you do more involved imaging studies looking at like individual cell layers in the retina or ERGs or something like that. And the vision loss is typically profound. About a third of these patients have really no light perception at all, and most of them are hanging around the 2400 range. So pretty severe vision loss. functionally, blind. And the exciting thing, though, and there's still, the treatment for this is, well, most patients don't have treatment. It's supportive care. It's providing assistive devices. And it was through Dr. Stone's clinic that I learned how to approach patients like this. Is you never tell these patients or their families, because usually, again, they're small children, so their families, you don't tell them things like, there's nothing we can do for you. That's the worst thing you can do. Because honestly, there's always something you can do for somebody. Whether that's getting them to somebody who knows more about that subject than you do, which is something I frequently do as a comprehensive ophthalmologist. There's a lot of ophthalmologists that know more about any particular disease than I do. Helping the patient get to that person. Helping them get an assistive device. Working with a state society for the blind. Or just, trying to, through insurance, try to get some kind of assistive devices, magnifiers, white canes, guide dogs. Helping that person to function in the world. There's always something to do. Having them come back once a year just to talk and give them updates about any particular research that's happening around that disease. There's always something to do. You never say, there's nothing we can do for you. That is not productive. You can be honest about the treatment options. I'm not saying lie to patients. If there's no cure or effective treatment to help their disease, tell them that. But there's always something to do to help that person. If you get what I'm saying. All right, but what's really exciting about Leber congenital amaurosis is that there have been a couple of different genes that we have successfully achieved gene therapy to improve vision. And it's in the fairly early stages of this. I think 2017 was the first time it was done and successfully. The particular gene is RPE65. That's the name of the gene. They're using an adenovirus vector that carries a normal copy of the gene to replace and I'm sure I'm getting these genetic details wrong with the terminology, to just fix the gene, basically. And there has been some improvement. Now, do these patients achieve normal vision? I think they're injecting it subretinally. They inject it underneath the retina. And it's remarkable because it's actually given some functional vision back for some patients. And so this is a medication now that you can receive. And it's just unbelievable. I think this is the first example of successful gene therapy, particularly for inherited retinal disease. So this was huge news in ophthalmology. And you want to know how much that gene therapy costs? It's only $850,000. I don't know what to do with that information, though. Can you imagine the prior authorization involved in something like that? Now, that's something that probably should have prior authorization for. You don't want to just willy-nilly, just making sure, okay, yeah, go, this person can have it. You would want to actually prove that the patient needs $850,000 for medication. The crazy thing is just how much it costs in the first place, right? I get it. There's probably a lot of R&D and not a lot of people are using that medication, but man, it's just really, it's wild to think about how much one treatment, but think about how life-changing that is. And obviously we don't have long-term follow-up on these patients yet. I think now we maybe have 7 years. And so I'm not sure what the latest data shows, and it's possible that they maybe lose vision again. It only lasts for a certain amount of time, but even those few years, that would be something. It'd be pretty remarkable. Now, for those patients, you're also dealing with amblyopia, right? Because the brain didn't even learn to develop normal vision. But if you have someone who barely sees any light, or if there's no light perception at all, which is, I'm sure, the first people that were receiving this gene therapy, and you get light back, You can see light for the first time. You can see colors for the first time. Potentially even see your family's faces for the first time. That is powerful. That's amazing. And I think it just shows you the future and where we're going with these types of diseases. So, success story, Leber congenital amaurosis. That's what I got for you for your eyeball knowledge today. Thank you all for listening. That's it for today's episode of Knock Knock Eye. I want to thank our executive producers, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. And leave me your comments, your questions, your concerns, your corrections. Let's add that in there. I just kind of talk. Sometimes I get things wrong. If I screwed up, my fellow ophthalmologist, please call me out on anything that I messed up. I think I got most of it right, though. Anyway, you can email me, knockknockhigh@human-content.com. Leave a comment on YouTube at Glaucomfleckens. All right, we'll monitor those. I'll try to have some YouTube question responses next episode. So stay tuned for that. That's it, you guys. We'll see you next time.
Knock, knock, goodbye.
Thanks for watching the episode. You can find more on that playlist over there. If you prefer to listen, or you just had your eyes dilated, you can binge full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Or join the party over on Patreon, where you get early access episodes, hang out with us, get lots of exclusive bonus content. Hope you subscribe, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think.